Hello and Assalamu alaikum. Today I will be talking about reprisals against human rights defenders in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. As you know, reprisals against human rights defenders in retaliation of their engagement with international and regional human rights systems constitutes an attack on the human rights, the rule of law, and international and regional human rights themselves. India has taken punitive actions against human rights defenders who remain engaged with UN human rights systems and regional human rights mechanisms. And these by sending the information to international and human rights systems on documenting various types of human rights violations on ground. Though documenting human rights violations in occupied Kashmir was never an easy job. The human rights defenders always faced intimidation, harassment, armed detentions, and also life threats by the occupation authorities. But these noble warriors, they took their job and continued to document the human rights violations in occupied Kashmir despite all odds, and sent these reports to the international human rights mechanisms, and that became a cause of and for India to take the repressive measures against these rights defenders. During this current dispensation, when we see the government of India has resorted to nefarious designs of discrediting the human rights defenders of Indian occupied Kashmir by charging them with false and fabricated charges like sedition and other draconian laws like PSA and UAPA. We have seen most recently a human rights defender of international repute, Khurram Parvez, being detained, who is the chairperson of the International Federation for Action and Enforced Disciplines for Human Rights on Enforced Disappearances. He is an internationally acclaimed human rights defender, but the charges which government of India laid against him was akin to discredit his credibility at international level. In the same way, Mr. Hassan Ontu, another human rights defender of Indian occupied Kashmir, who is the chairman of International Forum for Justice and Human Rights in occupied Kashmir, was detained on most recently by the occupation authorities, again on the same fabricated charges. These two human rights defenders, along with others, have always been the voice of Kashmiris at the international level, at local level, by documenting the human rights violations, by sending these violations to the international human rights systems. But what constitutes the reprisal by the Indian authorities? They try to intimidate them, harass them, their families, and maligning them and discredit them, so that the international community will not take cognizance of the documentation what they have done so far. These Indian acts are against the international law. These are against the international human rights systems. I take this opportunity to thank the international human rights defenders, especially the UN special rapporteurs and international human rights watchdogs, for raising their concern on the detention of Khurram Parvez, and international press reported vastly on his detention and condemned India's action and urged India to release him. So I will take also this opportunity to request, urge the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Ms. Elise Grants Carries, who is responsible to report on the reprisals, that she should talk to the government of India to stop the reprisals against human rights defenders in Indian occupied Kashmir, and not to harass their families, not to intimidate their families, and release these the vocal voices of Kashmir who are there to defend the voices of the people. They are the human rights defenders, not the terrorists.